It's one of the primary reasons the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Fiat currency has this weird thing that the debt is actually built into the monetary unit itself. You can never actually extinguish a debt. The liability is always transferred. Most people today are happy to accept dollars in settlement. People get paid in dollars, they'll hold the dollars in their bank account, and they'll use it to spend on other things. Many of these people that use dollars don't understand is that there is a liability built into that money. So even if you take all of these dollars out of the bank, you are still vulnerable to the counterparty risk of the central bank counterfeiting the currency and stealing your purchasing power. And what's even worse, they can outright deauthorize currency.
Greetings and welcome back to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am your host, Espen, and today we're having a conversation with Robert Breedlove. This is going to be an excellent conversation and for you to tune into if you're interested in the future of money, the future of freedom, and what might be happening as we seem to be in a transition in consciousness in general, but also in a major transition with what we know as money. Robert Breedlove is a freedom maximalist. He's a philosopher of money, and he's the founder of the WIM podcast, where they talk a lot about amazing topics such as money, blockchain, the future of money, but much more than that, health, reverse aging, peak performance. I mean, I remember meeting Robert Breedlove for the first time in person after following his work for some years at Aubrey Marcus's wedding. And it didn't take us many minutes before we had hit it off with some epic conversations. So I want to say a special welcome to the show, brother. Good to see you again. How are you?
Thank you, brother. No, I appreciate the introduction. And yeah, genuinely was looking forward to seeing you again. We definitely hit it off and had a great time at the wedding. You led an amazing breathwork ceremony. My God, my wife and I still talk about it. We both, I don't know, went into another dimension. I guess is the best way to put it.
Exactly. With multidimensional breathwork, that's very special. And I just want to acknowledge you because the loudest voice sometimes gets the most attention, but often in today's media, we know that people get ridiculed and attacked and whatever else for speaking against the narrative. I've seen you speak what you believe to be your truth for a long time. And it's years ago since I first heard you speak on Bitcoin, CBDCs, and many of these, disruptive topics. But when I heard it, I thought, and I can't say that I know all of your work, but I know some of what you teach is really resonating with me. And in this time of human transition, awakening, whatever we want to call it, there is so much here for us to cover. So we only have, say 50 minutes or 55 minutes to go. So I want to go real deep. Let's just start with the first question. So we're talking the future of freedom, fiat collapse, and the rise of conscious capital. You've talked in the past podcast that fiat is a theft in slow motion. They're printing money out of thin air. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, can we just get this out of the way? None of this is financial advice. This is for educational purposes only. However, we can talk from a little bit of experience here. So back to the question, fiat money, it's, you say it's theft. They're pressing a button, printing it out of thin air, and then it goes into, this very interesting system. Can you tell us a little bit about if fiat money is fake money, or theft, what's the rise and redemption? What is fiat and what are we coming into?
There's kind of a little bit of background on money that would be necessary. I'm going to try to just sort of summarize it very briefly to answer the question directly. We start with just the origin of the term fiat, actually. So fiat is a Latin term. It originates from, in the Bible, actually, it says fiat lux. That's when God said, let there be light. So God spoke everything or decreed everything into existence according to the Christian narrative. And fiat in the human world is basically the same thing, something that is decreed into existence, not something that actually exists, but something that we decree under the threat of legal force to exist or to be a thing. And essentially, in that way, it's kind of like man playing God. Humans can't speak things into existence, right? We have to work. We have to labor, we have to plan, we have to do all of these things to turn, kind of the raw entropy of nature into habitable order. Right? That is the nature of being human in this universe. We are not gods. We are not omniscient, omnipotent, nor omnipresent. We are mortal, we are finite, and we have to work for our survival. So this idea that some bureaucrat can speak a thing into existence, whether this is a law or whether this is a currency, is really just anti-human, basically. And so to get more into fiat currency specifically, a good way to define that is that it is a debt-based money. Now, if that sounds oxymoronic, that's because it is. A good definition of money is a tool that operates as the final extinguisher of debt, right? So if you've done me a favor and I owe you, I can settle that debt with money, right? Like I transfer you money and the debt is settled, right? So it extinguishes debt. But fiat currency has this weird thing that the debt is actually built into the monetary unit itself. And so what that means is that you can never actually extinguish a debt. The liability is always transferred. Now, most people today are happy to accept dollars in settlement. You go out, you do a job, you do whatever the thing is in a consensual trade to earn it. People get paid in dollars, they'll hold the dollars in their bank account and they'll use it to spend on other things. But the thing that many of these people that use dollars don't understand is that there is a liability, which is another term for a debt, built into that money. So even if you take all of these dollars out of the bank, right? A lot of like preppers would say, oh, take all the dollars out of the bank in case the bank collapses, put them in a safe or put them under your mattress or put them in, bury them in your yard or whatever. And now you're good. Now you're safe. You have this money that's out of the system, basically. But what's the problem with that is that the central bank can still print that currency and debase the purchasing power, even if it's under your mattress or in your yard or in your safe. You are still vulnerable to the counterparty risk of the central bank counterfeiting the currency and stealing your purchasing power. And what's even worse, they can outright deauthorize currency, right? When fiat, it's spoken into existence, right? It's under the threat of legal force. You have to accept fiat currency in the settlement of all debts, public and private. But that decree can be rescinded, right? And we've seen this with like there's a story in India where they had the 500 rupee banknote. Many people had physical copies of this, and literally overnight they just said, you know what? No more. The 500 rupee banknote has been turned off. It's no longer money. So this idea of money being a thing that we use to preserve our purchasing power across time and to transfer it to one another across space. Purchasing power here just meaning basically the value of the favors or the value of the service you have rendered to other people, right? Like you've gone into the marketplace, you've traded your time or your assets for money. You would expect that that money be redeemable for the time and assets of others at a later date, basically. That's purchasing power. But it can be stolen or outright, stolen through inflation or outright deauthorized in the case of fiat currency. And this really all boils down to the simple fact that fiat currency is not based on a very important principle in money, which is called proof of work, right? And this is somewhat intuitive. Another good definition for money, it's the thing or the instrument that we use to exchange for goods and services. All goods and services in the world require work to produce. Again, man can't speak it into existence. We have to work it into existence. So there's time, effort, energy, intelligence. All of these things go into all of the products and services that we create. It stands to reason that the instrument we use to obtain goods and services should also be based on the principle of work. If it is not, and we can produce it out of thin air, which is what the central bank does, then you can use that as a mechanism for perpetual theft. So, although this is a bit of a bitter pill to swallow, every country in the world operates with a central bank. All central banks today use fiat currencies. These are basically, again, they're debt-based money. It's like it's an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. It's not really a money. It's a fiduciary media is the technical term that has counterparty risk built into it that you cannot discharge. You can't get rid of the liability no matter what you do. No matter take the dollars out of the bank, it doesn't matter. Then a central bank can produce this thing without doing any work at all, right? You can just hit print, control P, print trillions of dollars as we've done in 2020, as we've done at an accelerating rate over the decades throughout the history of central banking. And that is used to steal the purchasing power from people that do the work and save. So it's this mechanism that empowers the centralization of government. It disempowers workers. It eviscerates the middle class. It's one of the primary reasons the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I think you could basically boil it down and say it is a giant pyramid scheme. And it's a pyramid scheme that's perpetrated all over the world. People have anywhere there's been an opportunity to print money historically, people have engaged in it. So it's like kind of this temptation that we've been unable to absolve ourselves from. And this is where, sound money really matters. You have to have a money that's based on principle to have a sustainable civilization based on consensual trade rather than coercion. And that's where I think Bitcoin shines.
It's such an interesting conversation. In 1971, President Nixon detached the fiat dollar from the gold standard and literally made it worthless. The only reason why money, fiat currency, is perceived to be worth something is because it's been received on the other end. If you walk down the road and you buy a coffee, they'll take your money and as such. But the moment they say we don't take fake money, zero value. So it's very interesting. You look at the purchasing power, and you probably correct me on this, but since 2020 hit, with the amount of stimulus, I think the purchasing power has gone down by at least 25%.
Well, again, it depends on what you denominate yourself in. I myself am a big steak consumer. Prices of my ribeye steaks have tripled since 2020. All right. So I used to pay, $10, $11 a pound for the ribeyes that I like. They're now $34 a pound. So purchasing power denominated in steak, I'm down 67%. Now fortunately, I don't, hold a lot of dollars. I hold a lot of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's up, from $3,800 to $90,000 in the same time period. So my stake purchasing power has gone through the roof, thankfully. But people that are just holding dollars, I mean, yeah, they're getting clobbered. 25% is a good number, but it always is contingent on the things that you yourself are seeking to buy.
I love that. Thank you for clarifying. I remember also seeing the amount of money that they're printing, knowing that for approximately every dollar that, you know, they have in the bank, they can lend out another 9 or 10, which is why there's such a benefit here to run a debt-based system. Because if we run a debt-based system, if we have $100, in the bank, we can lend out 900,
Yeah.
and there's no real liquidity. It's just printing money. So it's very interesting. I want to ask about CBDCs. A lot of people are now worried. We're talking about
Mm.
money going digital, central backed digital currencies. It's kind of and again, correct me on this or add to it. It's kind of the government's version of digital money. Some say, and again, I'm just putting this out there for you to tell us what your research has shown you. Some say that the CBDCs will be potentially coupled up with a carbon credit system. Hey, Robert, you weren't very nice on social media. And you know what? I was talking about this some years ago, right? And I was saying, no, they're going to start putting people in jail for social media posts. And people are laughing at me. What the fuck is happening in the UK? Right? So this is not even conspiracy anymore. I'm interested. CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, the government's attempt at control. When do you see it coming in? How do you see it evolving? And what do we need to know about it?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I'll speak first to the money multiplier effect that you talked about. That is a feature of a fiat currency system, right? That the central bank actually sets the reserve requirements for banks. So they say that, you put $100 on deposit, but the central bank legislates and dictates that the bank only needs to maintain 10%, 5%, in many cases 0% of that cash on reserve, and they can lend out the rest. So in the case of, if it's a 10% reserve requirement, you put $100 in the bank that's supposed to be available for you at any time. They don't keep $100 on demand available for you at any time. They lend out the other 90. In this case, they hold 10, and they make all the interest income on that lending. So it's these layers of fraud basically, that the core is the central bank, and then the commercial bank are these successive layers on top of it. Now that is very problematic and has a number of issues, but the in a way there's kind of a check against the central bank due to the commercial sector, because the commercial sector actually provides some layer, those same layers are somewhat, provide some obfuscation from the direct central bank control of the currency. They don't know what private banks are doing. They don't know who they're lending to. The banks commercial banking system operates closer to what we would expect a free market banking system to look like. And I give you this context to say that a CBDC basically reverses that. So a CBDC would obliterate the commercial banking sector and would just make everyone have an account directly at the Fed in the US, for instance, or whatever your nation's central bank is. And in that case, you've basically given the central bank absolute dictatorial control over the money, over your life. This is a prerequisite, as you said, to a social credit scoring system or any other form of direct social engineering. If you really want to see how devastating this can be, just look at China. I mean, China's had this in place for a number of years. If you say something the government doesn't like, they start by initially turning off your money for certain things, right? Like, well, maybe you said something we don't like, so now you're not allowed to travel, right? We're going to keep you in one place. And you say some more things we don't like, well, we're going to turn off your food. And they also will shame people publicly on billboards. So they create this whole kind of fear environment to try and socially engineer people into compliant behaviors. All of that, all of that social engineering nonsense that we would consider very antithetical to Western civilization, it is only possible with a central bank digital currency. You cannot have a Chinese style social credit scoring system without a central bank digital currency. So, what do people need to know? I mean, I live in Florida. We've already passed a law here that says there will be no CBDCs allowed for Florida residents. Like that, that's good. Okay, that's a great thing. But I think in the West, this thing's going to be rolled out in a way that is much less obvious, right? They're going to call it something else. It's going to have a whole marketing spin on it. It'll be, Fed direct bucks or whatever, and they'll probably bait you in with some type of universal basic income scheme. It'll be in the wake of some type of engineered economic or liquidity crisis, right? Where everyone's desperate, trying to eat, doesn't know what's going on. The Fed, which is the arsonist pretending to be the firefighter, steps in and says, "Hey, we're here to save the day. Everyone just enroll for your Fed direct bucks and you'll get $5,000 a month and that'll pay for your rent and your food and everything else." And you'll basically be opting into the digital panopticon at that point. So, I mean, what do people need to know? It's like, just know that there is no such thing as a centralized government or a central bank that is ever acting in your self-interest. These are predatory structures. They exist. There's tax farms. They are just tax farms, right? You are the crop, you are the product. They're harvesting your labor through inflation and taxation. As Nietzsche said, everything the state says is a lie, and everything the state has is stolen, right? You really need to internalize that truth deep into your heart to deal with the world as it is. I know it's a bitter pill to swallow. I know people don't want to hear it. People often want to be mad at the messenger or whatever the thing may be. But I would invite you to do a study and tell me where I'm wrong. So, as it pertains to CBDCs specifically, get your purchasing power out of the system. Get your purchasing power out of the system. Don't have all of your eggs in the basket of the commercial banking sector or any asset that can be manipulated by a centralized body, right? In the US, we have the CFTCC. I hope I'm saying the acronym correct, but it's basically the central clearinghouse for all public equities in the United States. You don't even own the stocks in your portfolio. You think you own them. You can go check out the documentary The Great Taking for the deep dive on this, but you don't. You have zero property rights in any public equity in the United States. Now, everyone thinks, "Oh, well, that's not true. I have these stocks, they pay dividends, my broker lets me move things around, etc." And to that, I would say, yeah, it all works great until it doesn't, right? The banking system also works. You can send wires and receive wires and all these things until one day you wake up and there's an economic collapse and they've suspended redeemability. And they're saying, hey, no more banking services until you go enroll with the Fed Direct program to get your UBI. So, how do you get purchasing power out of the system? Like we already said earlier, you can't put dollars under your mattress. That doesn't work. You have to be in either physical gold or Bitcoin. These are the only two options you have for getting purchasing power out of the fiat system and into your direct control. These are both what's called bearer assets. So in accounting, we have an equation that assets equals liabilities plus equity. Now, as I said earlier, fiat currency has that undischargeable liability built into it, so that your dollar asset is always, 95% asset at best and 5% liability, depending on how quickly they're debasing the currency. Only a bearer asset can be 100% equity to the owner. So when you hold a gold bar, right, in your physical possession, you by the mere act of possession presumes you as the rightful owner to that gold bar. You have all of the purchasing power in your hand. If you physically transfer that to someone else, it doesn't need to go through any legal system or certification. It's like they have the gold, right? The old saying, he who has the gold makes the rules. The same is true for Bitcoin, except Bitcoin is a digital bearer asset, which has introduces many trade-offs, but I would argue many positive benefits as well. That the problem with gold is that it's physical. So it can be physically seized. It's hard to conceal. It's expensive and cumbersome to move over great distances if you need to suddenly get out of Dodge because the central government is causing you problems. Coin as a non-digital, I'm sorry, as a digital gold, which is a non-physical money, gives you this advantage of being hyper concealable, hyper portable. You can just memorize 12 words essentially and cross a border with $1 billion on your brain. Right? Show me any other bearer asset in the world with which that is possible. Now, people would come retort and say, oh, you can do that with any crypto. You can do it with Ethereum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with all of those is that those are not decentralized. There is some group, just like the central bank can debase your US dollars, the Ethereum Foundation can debase your Ethereum tokens. There's only one crypto asset that is truly decentralized, and that is Bitcoin. We could go more into that if you like, but to answer the question initially, it's like you need purchasing power out of the system to protect yourself against this transition to a CBDC world. And the only two options you have are physical gold and quote unquote physical Bitcoin, even though Bitcoin's non physical. You have to hold the private key, which is to keep the secret that is the Bitcoin.
Interesting. Thank you for that. That was so much value, not just answering the question, but also talking about the solutions, the multiple solutions. I think it's also important to look at history. That the fiat dollar was backed by gold. And, first we had the rise and the fall of the Dutch Empire, then the rise and the fall of the English Empire. And who knows, the rise, potentially the fall of the fiat currency. Very interesting to see what just happened in Venezuela, supposedly because of some reasons, but it seems the largest amount of oil and then no longer trading in the American dollar. So the big bully had to go in and say no more. So not a capital can be seized, but entire countries.
Yes, indeed, indeed. I think this is very important because you've mentioned 1971 a couple of times, and there's a very important connection to Venezuela here. Nixon suspended the gold standard in 1971. So you were correct. The dollar went from being a redeemable token for gold to a non-redeemable token, right? When it was said to be a temporary measure. Again, it was 1971, so we're 55 years after the fact now. And one of these economists said there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government solution. And I'll be damned if that isn't right when it comes to the US dollar. So when we suspended redeemability of dollars into gold, we were forced, because we're the global reserve currency, right? If we want to maintain control of the global financial system, you have to create what's called reservation demand for the dollar. So you have to create an incentive for people to hold the dollar and transact in the dollar. So when we suspended the gold standard, when it's redeemable for gold, there's a big incentive. Oh, these things are literally as good as gold, right? So if I hold them and save in them and transact in them, then I'm creating demand for the dollar, which is indirectly demand for gold. But when you break that redeemability, all of a sudden the incentive is like, let me just dump this paper, right? It's worthless paper. The US monetary empire has to shift to another standard that creates that reservation demand for the dollar. And in this case, we shifted to the petrodollar system, which is black gold, right? So now that we broke the peg between the US dollar and gold, we switched the peg, and this is in 1973 when the system really got moving, to being not redeemable for gold, but the US imperial empire forces every country in the world to denominate its oil trade in dollars. So this forces all countries to use the dollar as a reserve asset so that they can transact in oil. Obviously, oil is the lifeblood of the modern industrial economy, right? This is the primary energy source for all economic activity worldwide. So it makes sense that if you want a sustainable global monetary regime, you would peg it to the primary energy source of that system, which in the post-industrial age is still oil. And so that's what's going on in Venezuela. Is Venezuela, which has one of the largest oil reserves of any country in the world, they said, you know what, we're going to start selling some of this directly to China, and we're going to denominate these transactions in Chinese currency rather than the US dollar. And that is a big slap to the face of the US imperial empire. And you see the gang violence like response, right? That we move in, we seize the country effectively. And it's all about the money, right? The old saying, follow the money, find the truth. I find it to be quite bothersome to see people celebrating like, oh, Trump liberated this country or whatever. And look, I'm not a Maduro, whatever his name is. I'm not a fan of any of these guys. I think all statesmen are complete fucking scammers. They're all just horrible people. Again, everything the state says is a lie. Everything it has is stolen. These people are the spokespeople for the state, right? So they're criminals, all of them. But I find it disconcerting that people celebrate this as if, Trump or the United States came in and liberated these people. It's like, no, they didn't. Your tax farm just got taken over by another tax farm. That's what happened. And it's all what the incentive for that is traceable all the way down to the petrodollar standard. The US simply defending its hegemony, right? Its stranglehold on the world and its control of the global oil trade.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for speaking to that. I follow the money is really great. And I've got another saying as well. If you see it on the news, it is either already happened or the opposite is true.
Yes, that's a yes, 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 yes.
We saw during the pandemic that was very evident that they have had a big agenda. Fear, 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 fear. You know, swallow the fear. Okay, I want to ask a little bit about Bitcoin because this is an amazing topic and also a bit of a sensitive one. Some people are saying that it was created by Satoshi Nakamoto. It's scarce because it only has 21 million. We know this, right? And then some say, no, no, it's created by let's just say a certain American governmental organization. You would know this better than anyone. What are your thoughts on just the backbone of it? Is it indeed because blockchain once promised freedom, but now we see BlackRock, World Bank, central banks positioning themselves as stewards of a very, high tech disruption. Has decentralization been hijacked? What are your thoughts?
So the Bitcoin network itself is, there's a lot of ways to think about what it is, but one sort of summary way to put it is that it's money wrapped in military grade encryption designed to do really two things. Survive, right? It's like designed to survive every level of threat vector, right? State level threat. Any centralized entity that wants to destroy it, it's literally made every design trade-off to survive and to adhere to its fixed supply cap of 21 million. That's it. That's the whole value proposition of Bitcoin is that it's indestructible. and it's uninflatable. You cannot expand the supply at all. It's a first and only fixed supply asset humanity has ever had access to. And it's so difficult to understand the significance of something like that. I wrote an essay titled "The Number Zero and Bitcoin." You have to get into innovations as profound as the number zero, the wheel, fire, like these like crazy civilization altering, consciousness altering innovations to understand the profundity of Bitcoin. It's not just a new, it's not a new iPhone, right? We're talking about a new language or the discovery of a new language, or, in the case of zero, for instance, in that essay, it's the most powerful idea we've ever encountered, basically. It was resisted by literally Aristotelian philosophy, all of Western civilization. It was illegal. Number zero was illegal, but basically because it offered merchants the ability to conduct trade faster, better, cheaper, less prone to error, it spread, right? It's an unstoppable idea. And it gave us calculus. Calculus is the mathematical bedrock for all modern science. So the Enlightenment, the Industrial Age, the scientific revolution, all of these things are only possible because of the number zero. So, and it comes from ancient India of all places. This guy discovers zero, said to be the experience of shunyata, which is like, the absolute nothingness you may have experienced if you've ever been in a deep meditation. He basically he symbolized that experience in mathematics. It was an Indian mathematician named Brahmagupta. And so this guy discovers this thing in meditation, brings it back and symbolizes it in mathematics. That becomes the Hindu Arabic numeral system. It really originates in India, but it spreads to the West through the Middle East. That's why we call it Hindu Arabic numeral system. And that thing completely took over the world. Completely. We all use zero-based mathematics today. We don't even think twice about it, right? It's completely there. It's baked in. There's no argument. There's no like, oh, maybe we should use non-zero. Like it does. It's just completely culturally programmed, right? We're infused with it. That's what Bitcoin is, right? It's just an idea ultimately. This idea of 0% inflation money, right? People have always gravitated towards the most inflation resistant money. That's what gold was. Gold has it satisfies all the properties of good money, which I won't get into, but of all the monetary metals, it's the most scarce. It's the most difficult to produce, such that when I put purchasing power into it, I have the best chance of preserving my purchasing power into the future because no one knows how to debase it or counterfeit it, right? That's the magic of gold. Bitcoin has basically perfected that. We now have a money, it's the first fixed supply asset in the history of the human race that is perfectly immune to inflation. There is 0% unexpected supply increase in Bitcoin. Now, people want to get technical here and say, oh, well, no, there's new Bitcoin issued every day. And it's like, yes, sure. But we know that there's 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million. So it's like, if you look at a cap table, you look at it on a fully diluted basis. You don't say how many shares are outstanding today. You say how many shares are authorized, right? Warrants, options, everything. If you execute everything, what does that cap table look like? That's what we have with Bitcoin. It's like it's 21 million fully diluted, quote unquote, cap table for money. You'll never see more than that. And so that idea is so powerful. And now when we go back to the question of like, oh, well, who invented it? Okay, well, I happen to know who invented the number zero, at least from my research. That's what it led me to Brahmagupta. I never met the guy. I wasn't around in the 6th or 7th century. But based on the history that I studied, that's who originated it. But when you look at other innovations, now, just for instance there, if you didn't like, I don't know, Indian mathematicians for some reason. Say you're some kind of racist asshole that doesn't like Indian mathematicians for some reason. You wouldn't stop using the zero-based numeral system because Brahmagupta invented the number zero, right? Like if you did that, you would get your ass absolutely destroyed in the marketplace, right? Try going to work or running your life on an alternative mathematics system when everyone else runs zero-based mathematics. You have no chance, right? You will 100% go to the system that works. The wheel, right? Do we know who invented the wheel? I don't think we know who invented the wheel, right? I don't know it's ancient. I mean, that's all I know is that it's ancient. It's been around for a long time. We use it on a lot of things. I wouldn't stop using the wheel because I don't know who invented it, right? If you told me the CIA invented the wheel, I'd be like, all right, well, fuck, they invented the wheel, but it's out. You know, it's an idea. It works. Everyone uses it. It's fine. This, fire, right? Who discovered fire? Who harnessed fire for the first time as an energy technology? It was definitely someone a long, long, long time ago. I don't think any of us know him or her, probably him. Nonetheless, if we did know them and we didn't like them or we didn't like their intentions, we wouldn't stop using fire. And so this may sound like kind of a strained analogy to some people, but the gist of Bitcoin is that it is open source software. It is, an open source software is basically you can't hide anything inside of it. It's 100% transparent. So there's no back doors, there's nothing you can hide in an open source software project. That thing has been working flawlessly for now 17 years. It's gone as high as a $2.2 trillion asset. There's a giant honeypot for anyone that could hack it. They could basically, if you could break SHA 256 or elliptic curve cryptography, you could go into the marketplace and short Bitcoin, break that, and you'd have a multi-trillion dollar payday. So there's a giant incentive for anyone that can break it to break it. No one's been able to do it. And whoever created it, it's basically irrelevant. It really does. Even if the CIA created it, if Satan himself created it, it wouldn't really matter. It's like, well, okay, you've created this perfectly fair monetary system in which you can't hide anything. So there's no information asymmetries. It has a fixed supply. It's essentially a level playing field for all economic actors. It doesn't matter who invented that. And I know that's like hard for people to accept, but it's the problem is you're confusing, not you, but someone who may wield this criticism. They're confusing something like a consumer technology or a consumer application with a protocol. And so, the iPhone, for instance, it's the dominant smartphone in the world, I think. Still now, I don't know. Android might be, I don't know which one's more dominant globally. That those things are subject to just consumer preference, right? But a protocol, again, something more like zero-based mathematics, the English language, like these things become very deeply rooted and they become basically the means by which we deal with one another. The internet itself is a layer of open source protocols. You've heard of probably HTTP, TCP/IP, etc. That's They're just languages basically that people speak to one another or machines speak to one another. These things aren't as disruptible. Once they get entrenched, they're basically there to stay, right? English is not going anywhere. Zero-based mathematics is not going anywhere. The internet's not going anywhere. What is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the internet of money. It's just the latest layer in the internet protocol suite. Although instead of being allowing people to move information without permission, right? I can create a website without asking IBM's permission, for instance. You can now move purchasing power without asking permission. So it's like the simple way to put it is the internet and gold had a baby and its name is Bitcoin. And it's a really, really, really big deal. And we're, 17 years into absorbing the profundity of this idea. But like imagine being in the 6th century, 17 years after the invention of zero. There might be a zero maximalist. And he's like, oh, this is such a big deal. It's going to change everything. And everyone be like, what are you talking about? Like it's just math. It's not that big of a deal. But then when you see how, these changes in our protocols, they can change literally everything.
Very interesting. Is there a chance, and if so, what is the percentage, approximate chance, that Bitcoin can be controlled similarly to a CBDC?
Well, what is a good analogous question to that? People often frame the question as like, how do you stop Bitcoin? You asked control, but let me focus on stopping because if Bitcoin were controlled or subverted in that way, it would basically there's more of an incentive to just stop it. If you could manipulate it and control it, well, then someone would exploit that to turn it off, right? The state specifically. And so I think a good analogous question to that is How would you turn off sort of two different ways to look at this? How could you turn off the internet everywhere in the world forever? No, the internet is just anywhere two computers are connected and communicating through those protocols that I mentioned, HTTP, SMTP, TCP/IP, etc. It's a pretty difficult thought experiment to imagine a world, and like unless the whole world just gets obliterated, right? The whole world just explodes and that's it. It's a game over for all of us. Well, in that world, there's no internet, there's no electricity, etc. Imagine a world in which we could turn off the electricity everywhere forever. Like that, how would you do that? I mean, there's solar panels, we have generators, there's it's such a distributed technology layer. How could you shut down the production of electricity everywhere forever? It would take such a cataclysmic event that it would probably have to obliterate the entire human race for that to be possible. And I think that's the level of event you need to stop Bitcoin, because again, Bitcoin is just the internet, right? It's anywhere there's two computers that are interlinked, they can run the open source Bitcoin protocol and they can transact with one another in the same way we can send emails to one another through SMTP, right? Or we can send electricity to one another over, um, you know, electricity wires and things like this. So I don't think that, and this goes back to the open source software thing. Bitcoin cannot be controlled or manipulated like a CBDC. Bitcoin is basically the anti CBDC, right? CBDC being central bank digital currency. Bitcoin is a decentralized bank in cyberspace, right? It's the only online bank that will never go bankrupt, is a good way to think about it. No one can control it, no one can manipulate it. It's a consensually adopted internet protocol. And so I think you're quickly pushed into these scenarios of just radical cataclysm when you try to formulate a situation in which Bitcoin could be taken out or controlled or otherwise not exist.
Good to hear and great answer. I wanted to ask because that's been coming up from a lot of our audience. Yeah, okay, well, CBDCs are here as the government's version, a very delayed, very poor version.
It's their competitive response to Bitcoin. It's something people
Yeah.
need to understand. The central bank never once talked about a CBDC until the past 17 years and the emergence of Bitcoin, right? So this legacy institution, this paper-based institution, whatever, you could say they're electronic, but they're definitely not digitally native, right? It's a centralized database, basically. That business model is being threatened by the emergence of Bitcoin. So what are they doing? They're trying to create a competitive response, right? If we can get everyone onto our database and we can control them directly and we have them all tied into a social credit scoring system, then maybe we can prevent them from getting their purchasing power out of the system and into something like Bitcoin. So that's what's happening. It's a competitive response.
That's very interesting because you look at history and you see when, around the time or before the time, as we talked about, Nixon detached the gold standard from the US dollar. They also, and this, don't quote me on the time frame here, you might know, they also made it illegal to hold gold. You were forced in the US to sell the gold to the government, and if you held gold without having having notified the government, you may go to jail.
Yes, that was 38 years prior to 1971. In 1933, Executive Order 6102 made private gold ownership illegal under the threat of imprisonment or a very significant fine. Again, I think it was a $10,000 fine in 1933, which would be, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars today.
Yeah, and what are they doing now? Well, in certain countries in Europe, France and Spain, you're not able to transact, I think, over 1,000
Mhm.
euros,
Yes.
in cash. And I think in the UK, if not all across Europe, it's now become illegal to hold more than 10,000 euros in cash or something
Yes.
like that.
Correct.
So it looks quite similar. I'm just saying.
It doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
Oh, truth bump moment. Okay, quickly, I want to talk infrastructure before I get to the last question. And thank you for your time. And again, none of this is financial advice, but I'm very confident if you're watching right now, you might have some of these questions and you might have some of these questions answered in a way that might serve you. So thank you for sharing this far and wide if this has been useful. I want to talk infrastructure. You see big institutions at the moment. They're buying up a lot of infrastructure. Some examples, let's say, look at someone like Bill Gates buying up farmland everywhere, potentially to control food supply. You see BlackRock, Vanguard, major institutions, right? Even here in Australia, they're not BlackRock. What's the other one called? I got a mind blank.
Vanguard, State Street,
You're one of those. It's Blackstone.
oh,
Thank you.
Blackstone. Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
Blackstone just got the approval to buy an island not far from where I live called Hamilton Island for 1.2 billion. So it's like they're buying up the infrastructure. Okay, what do we have? We have a fire, horrible fire recently in California. So many homes get destroyed. And what's happening next week? BlackRock's in there. They're buying up houses for cash. So it looks like people are buying up infrastructure. I want to ask specifically about this notion. I don't want to, I don't want to project any opinion, hence why I'm asking a question. And infrastructure in the digital world, it looks like, for example, Ripple is buying up a tremendous amount of infrastructure. And obviously those some of those big companies that we are just discussing also buying up a tremendous amount of digital assets, including Bitcoin, EXRP, Ripple, and so on and so forth. What do you see happening here with not just buying the asset, but buying up the infrastructure in which you need to be able to trade that asset?
Yeah, it's a brilliant observation and good question. I would just at a high level say that this is a direct consequence of fiat currency. Actually, you're funneling purchasing power slash wealth from the poor and the middle class to the super rich. And now I don't, but I got to be careful here. There's nothing wrong with being rich. Being rich is amazing. We should all aspire to be rich. Rich people are not bad people. It's all about how did you obtain that wealth, right? Did you take the making path of entrepreneurship, right? You went out and solved problems for customers, you made the world a better place and you earned a fortune? Fantastic. We love that. Or did you take the path of taking, right? Were you a criminal or a statesman, which is the same thing, right? Did you go and steal wealth from other people rather than create wealth for consenting customers, right? So I don't want to get into that territory where people like to blame the rich or accuse, the rich people of being evil or the bad billionaires. Like that's that's ignorance on display. It's all about how did you obtain it? That is the only thing that matters. Did you make it or did you take it, right? And so this buying up of infrastructure that you just highlighted by a lot of these giant centralized pools of wealth. And I'm glad you actually drew the comparison here between, the BlackRock, Blackstone, Vanguard, State Street, and a company like Ripple, because Ripple is one of these giant scammers as well, right? They're literally selling their XRP shitcoin to ignorant retail investors. They're mobilizing a bot army on social media to pretend like Ripple or XRP is the next Bitcoin or the next big token, and people are just getting taken to the cleaner on this thing. They've been selling $500 million of XRP tokens, dumping them on retail investors, 500 million per quarter for about the past 10 years. It's one of these fucking shitbag scammers. I think it was Garlinghouse just bought a $100 million house here in Miami. Like that guy's not he's not solving any problems in the world. He's solving zero problems, right? He's just stealing your money, right? He stole your money through this. Actually, this is where it's a little bit of a gray area, right? Because technically the people went and bought the XRP token, believing all the marketing hype and the social media bot army that it's going to be the next Bitcoin or whatever, and they basically gave their wealth to the Brad Garlinghouse that goes and buys the $100 million home in Miami. So it's slightly better on the moral curve than outright central banking, where they're just at gunpoint printing money, saying you have to use this dollar to settle all debts, public and private, but we're going to print it and steal your purchasing power. It's slightly better morally, but it's not that much different mechanically. And so all of this buying of infrastructure by these large centralized capital pools, I think is a consequence of that. These entities are transferring purchasing power from the poor and the middle class to themselves, you know, whether they're doing that via a psyop and tricking people into buying an XRP token, or they're doing it through the actual coercive legal monopoly of central banking. Again, slightly different morally, but about the same thing mechanically. Well, what are you going to do with all that wealth, right? You've created this infinite money machine. What else are you going to do? You're going to go out and buy investable assets, which often come in the form of infrastructure and other, real estate things that can generate yield into the future. So I don't want to get into the game of trying to demonize any business from purchasing any asset in a consensual trade. That's not really the problem. I think what we're observing is a symptom of a deeper problem. The deeper problem being people's ignorance of money in general. And, you've said a few times, this is not financial advice. Well, I would like to give some financial advice. This is the one thing that I can give to everyone. And I do hope you will take it. Study the nature and history of money. Study Bitcoin. Study these things. This is financial advice. You can take this advice, and I guarantee you it will improve your life. There is no chance that studying the nature history of money or studying Bitcoin will not improve your intelligence, your awareness, your prudence, your understanding of the world. It's like taking was it the blue pill in the Matrix that wakes you up, or the red pill? I forget which one. Whichever one, the red pill. We call it the orange pill, actually. We often talk in Bitcoin, we call it the orange pill moment, which is like the moment that you realized the whole US dollar fiat complex is the matrix, basically, and you were awakened and unplugged from it. We actually drew that metaphor from the matrix. We call it the orange pill. We're often asked, who orange pilled you? For instance, me, it was Saifedean Ammous in his book, The Bitcoin Standard. That was my orange pill, right? That helped. That's when I awakened to see, oh, I'd actually seen the central banking scam through the book The Creature from Jekyll Island years before, but that's my a great book. Safety's book, The Bitcoin Standard, is what awakened me to the realization that Bitcoin is the solution to that deep-seated problem. So, yes, none of this is financial advice other than study the nature and history of money, study Bitcoin. I guarantee you this will improve your financial circumstances, your spiritual circumstances. You will level up your consciousness through this studious effort.
And the podcast, WIM podcast, the Win podcast, is where you share a lot of these tools. Breedlove underscore 22 on Instagram, not just for these kind of topics, but for some epic inspiration. Some would say you look a bit like an Adonis. Yeah, you exercise and eat and take care of yourself. And
Bitcoin will do that to you as well. I was a bit of a fitness guy before this, but it just makes you so the common theme you see is people taking inventory of their lives. Like, "Oh, I'm good here and I'm bad here." And they start not marking things off the bad list and trying to add things to the good list. A lot of people stop drinking. A lot of people find God. A lot of people start families. Obviously, the financial success helps people start businesses and do other things. The Bitcoin community is a very interesting place. It does seem that, and it sounds a little bit strange perhaps, but the idea of unstoppable sound money, it's a very powerful material incentive for truth and justice and a lot of these virtue ethics that we're lacking in the world. And it does seem like people that study it really closely start to adopt those principles. We mentioned proof of work earlier, for instance. That's the solution to everything, right? Do you have a problem? Okay, there's only one actual solution, or at least there's one ingredient to every solution. Let's put it that way. Work. You've got to do the work, right? You want to get in shape, you got to do the work. You want to build a business, you got to do the work. You want to fix your financial situation or your relationship or any other problem you could possibly imagine, well, you got to do the work, right? So this alternative universe we've lived in where we're like, oh, there was an economic crisis, we'll just print money and solve the problem. Like, no, that doesn't work because it doesn't involve work, right? Like, stop deluding yourself. Accept reality for what it is, right? We face a horizon. The onrushing horizon of the future brings with it uncertainty, entropy, chaos, right? We're constantly dealing with this. The only way to deal with it intelligently is through work. We cannot, by fiat, declare things into existence. We cannot wish away poverty. We cannot, end world hunger by printing more green units of currency. It doesn't work like that. So there's my diatribe on work. But yes, Bitcoin's a great instrument for it.
Last question for you, straight off the cuff. So here we go. I want you to imagine that you are on the world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered, watching, tuning in. They're fully present with you right now. Take a breath whenever you're ready. Please do share. What is your message to the world right now?
Hmm. I can't take credit for this, but we have a wonderful mantra in Bitcoin: stay humble and stack sats. Sats are the subunit of Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin is 100 million sats, which is a name in homage to Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin. I would hope people would understand that message. I guess you could shorten it to stay humble and stack. I think this applies to everything in life, right? Stack knowledge. Compound interest is such an amazing thing, right? So if you get 1% better every day, then by the end of the year, you're like 37 times better, something crazy like that. Just constantly, incrementally be eking out these gains each and every day, right? Whether it's knowledge, fitness, food, relationships, whatever it is, and watch the magic of compound interest carry you forward. So my short version message of that would be stay humble and stack.
Okay, we are dropping the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Breedlove, great to see you, brother. Can't wait to catch up. I'll send you a message later. Let's stay in touch, man. Thank you so much. And if you guys want to hear more in regards to these topics, comment below, tag and share with as many people as you can. This is the time to share it because we are in the transition. This information is very relevant right now. So thank you all for watching. And again, Robert, great to see you, brother. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great to see you as well, brother. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Robert Breedlove, everybody.